Some moments in life look small from the outside, but inside them, an entire world quietly changes. That night began like any other evening for Daniel Hayes, yet before the night ended, something inside him would close forever. The restaurant was warm and softly lit. Gentle music floated through the air while people talked and laughed around small candlelit tables. It was the kind of place couples chose when they wanted a peaceful evening together. Daniel had picked it carefully because he believed tonight might help fix the strange distance that had grown between him and the woman he loved across the table sat Clara Bennett for 3 years. She had been the center of Daniel's life. He remembered the first day they met at a small friends gathering. Clara had laughed at one of his awkward jokes, and that laugh had stayed with him long after the night ended. She was intelligent, charming, and full of quiet confidence. Being with her had always made Daniel feel like life was moving in the right direction, but lately something had changed. Over the past few weeks, Clara had become different. Her messages were shorter. Sometimes she replied hours later. She seemed distracted whenever they met, as if her mind was somewhere else. When Daniel asked if something was wrong, she always smiled politely and said she was just busy. Daniel tried to believe her. Relationships had ups and downs. Everyone said that. So he told himself this was only a temporary phase. Still, tonight he could feel the distance clearly. Clara sat across from him, scrolling through her phone. The candlelight reflected in her eyes, but those eyes were not looking at him. Daniel waited patiently while she finished typing something. When she finally placed the phone on the table, he offered a gentle smile. "Long day?" he asked. Clara sighed slightly. "You could say that." Daniel nodded. He studied her face for a moment, hoping to see the warmth he used to know so well. But her expression seemed tired, almost annoyed, as if she didn't want to be there. The waiter arrived with their food, placing the plates carefully in front of them. The smell of fresh pasta filled the air. But the atmosphere at the table felt colder than the evening outside. Daniel tried to start a normal conversation. He told her about a project at work that had finally been approved. It was something he had been hoping for months. And normally, Clara would have celebrated with him. But tonight she only gave a quick nod. "That's good," she said. Daniel felt a quiet disappointment settle in his chest. He watched her pick up her fork and take small bites without saying much. Her phone vibrated once beside her plate. She glanced at the screen quickly and turned it face down. Something about that small movement made Daniel uneasy. Still, he didn't want to assume the worst. He took a breath and tried again. "Do you remember that little beach town we visited last summer?" he asked with a hopeful smile. "I saw a photo of it earlier today. It made me think maybe we should go again." Clara shrugged. "Maybe." Her answer felt distant. Daniel leaned back slightly in his chair. The conversation kept slipping away like sand through his fingers. He didn't understand why everything felt so forced. A few minutes passed in silence. Around them, the restaurant buzzed with life. But their table felt isolated. Finally, Daniel decided to do something simple, something natural. He reached his hand across the table and gently placed it over Clara's hand. It was a small gesture, a soft reminder that they were together. But the reaction came instantly. Clara pulled her hand away as if the touch surprised her. Her voice was sharp. "Don't touch me." "Daniel." The words cut through the air like a sudden crack of thunder. Daniel froze. His hand slowly retreated back to his side of the table. For a moment he wondered if he had misunderstood her. But Clara's expression showed no confusion, only irritation. Daniel blinked, trying to process what had just happened. I'm sorry," he said quietly. "Did I do something wrong?" Clara rubbed her forehead like someone dealing with a headache. "I just don't like being touched right now." Daniel nodded slowly, though her answer left him more confused than before. 3 years together, and she had never reacted like that, not once. A heavy silence settled between them again. Daniel stared down at his plate, but he wasn't really seeing the food anymore. His mind replayed the moment again and again. "Don't touch me." The words echoed, louder each time. He looked back up at Clara. She had already picked up her phone again. Her fingers moved quickly as she typed a message. A faint smile appeared on her lips. Daniel noticed it immediately. That smile had once been for him. "Who are you talking to?" he asked calmly. Clara looked up for a brief second. "Just a friend." Then she returned to the screen. Daniel studied her quietly. Something deep inside him whispered that this wasn't just about being tired or stressed. Something was changing. The waiter returned to ask if everything was okay. Clara gave a quick, polite smile and said the food was great. Daniel nodded politely as well, though he had barely eaten anything after the waiter left. Clara finally put her phone down again. "You're quiet," she said. Daniel forced a small smile. "Just thinking about what?" He hesitated, then he chose honesty. "About us." Clara leaned back in her chair. "What about us?" Daniel looked directly into her eyes. "Lately, it feels like you're far away, even when we're sitting together." Clara's expression tightened slightly. "You're overthinking things." "Am I?" Daniel asked gently. She crossed her arms. "Yes, I've just been busy. Not everything has to be a big emotional conversation." Daniel nodded slowly again. He didn't want to argue in the middle of a restaurant. But the truth was becoming harder to ignore. When someone who once loved your presence suddenly pushes you away, the change feels impossible too. Miss Clara checked the time on her phone. "I should probably head home soon." "She?" said Daniel looked at her for a moment. The dinner he had hoped would reconnect them now felt like the quiet end of something. He signaled the waiter and asked for the bill. Clara looked. "Surprised? You're done already?" "Yes," Daniel replied calmly. The bill arrived, and Daniel paid without hesitation. It had always been his habit, and tonight was no different. They walked out of the restaurant together outside. The cool night air felt refreshing after the heavy atmosphere inside. The streetlights cast long shadows across the sidewalk. Clara wrapped her coat tighter around herself. Daniel stood beside her car. For a few seconds, neither of them spoke. Daniel looked at her face one more time. The woman he had loved for 3 years now felt strangely unfamiliar. 100 questions filled his mind. Was there someone else? Had she stopped loving him? Was he the only one still holding on? But then he remembered her voice at the table. "Don't touch me." Sometimes a single sentence reveals more truth than 1,000 explanations. Daniel realized something quietly in that moment. Love should never feel like begging for space in someone's life. He stepped back slightly. "Well," he said gently, "get home safe." Clara looked confused. "That's it?" Daniel gave a small nod. "Yes." She studied his face, almost expecting him to say something more. Normally, Daniel would try to fix the tension, ask more questions, or suggest meeting again tomorrow. But tonight, he died single quotes. He simply walked toward his car. "Daniel," Clara called suddenly. He turned. "Yes." For a moment, it seemed like she wanted to say something important. But then she just shook her head. "Nothing." Daniel gave one last polite smile. "Good night, Clara." He got into his car and started the engine. Clara watched as his car pulled away from the curb and disappeared into the quiet city street. She stood there for a moment longer than she expected. Something about his silence felt strange. Usually Daniel fought for their relationship. He asked questions. He tried to understand, but tonight he had simply accepted it. Clara pushed the thought away and unlocked her car door. As she sat inside, her phone vibrated again. The same name appeared on the screen. She smiled and began typing a reply. But somewhere across the city, Daniel Hayes was driving through the dark streets with a calm expression on his face. His heart hurt, but his mind felt clear for the first time in weeks. He stopped chasing answers. Sometimes the truth reveals itself quietly. And tonight Daniel had heard it loud enough. If someone tells you not to touch them, the most powerful response is simply letting go. What Clara didn't realize as she drove home that night was that something important had shifted. Daniel. Hayes had stopped trying to hold on, and when a man who truly loves someone finally decides to walk away, the silence he leaves behind can be far heavier than any argument. But Clara would only understand that truth much later, much later when the man who once waited patiently for her attention was no longer waiting at all. The days after that dinner passed quietly for Daniel Hayes. The strange part was not the silence between him and Clara Bennett. The strange part was how peaceful that silence felt. For weeks before the dinner, his mind had been full of confusion and questions. He kept wondering why Clara seemed distant, why her attention kept drifting away, why every conversation felt forced. But after hearing her say those cold words that night, something inside him stopped chasing answers. The silence that followed was heavy. Yet it was honest. On the first morning after the dinner, Daniel woke up earlier than usual. Sunlight was slowly filling his apartment, and the city outside was just beginning to wake up. Normally, he would reach for his phone to check if Clara had sent a message during the night. That habit had become automatic over the years. But that morning, he didn't pick up the phone right away. Instead, he lay there quietly, staring at the ceiling, letting the stillness settle inside him. Eventually, he checked the phone. No messages. Daniel was not surprised. He got out of bed, made a simple breakfast, and prepared for work. The routine felt ordinary, but something inside him felt different. For the first time in weeks, he didn't feel the pressure of trying to fix a relationship that seemed to be slipping away. Meanwhile, across the city, Clara Bennett was having a different morning. She woke up later than usual and reached for her phone immediately. A small part of her expected to see Daniel's name on the screen. After all, Daniel had always been the one who reached out first after disagreements. Even small arguments usually ended with him sending a message asking she was okay. But there was nothing. She frowned slightly, then shrugged it off. Maybe he's just busy, she murmured to herself. Clara had convinced herself that the dinner argument had been small. In her mind, it was just another uncomfortable moment between two people who had been together for a long time. She assumed Daniel would eventually call and try to smooth things over. But the day passed without a word from him. Daniel focused on work. He worked as a project manager at a construction design company, and the office was busy as always. Plans had to be reviewed, deadlines were approaching, and meetings filled most of the day. Normally, his thoughts would wander toward Clara while he worked, especially when his phone buzzed. But this time he kept the phone face down on his desk. His coworkers noticed something different about him, too. Daniel was usually quiet and thoughtful, but that day he seemed more focused, more present in every conversation. At lunchtime, his colleague Marcus joined him at a small cafe near the office. Marcus had known Daniel for years, and he could easily read his friend's mood. "You seem lighter today," Marcus said while stirring his coffee. "Did something good happen?" Daniel gave a small smile. "Not exactly good," he replied. "Just clear." Marcus raised an eyebrow. "That sounds mysterious." Daniel thought for a moment before answering. "Sometimes you realize you've been holding on to something that stopped holding on to you a long time ago." Marcus nodded slowly, understanding more than Daniel expected. "Ah," he said quietly. "Relationship problems?" Daniel didn't deny it. They didn't discuss it further. But Marcus gave him a friendly pat on the shoulder before they returned to work. That evening, Daniel went home and did something he hadn't done in months. He went for a run. The cool air of the evening filled his lungs as he moved through quiet streets and neighborhood parks. Running had once been his favorite way to clear his mind. But during the last year of his relationship, he had slowly stopped doing it. Clara often preferred quiet evenings at home, and Daniel had adjusted his habits to match hers. Now, as his feet hit the pavement rhythmically, he felt something he hadn't felt in a long time. Freedom, not the kind that comes from anger or rebellion, but the quiet freedom of not constantly worrying about someone else's changing mood. Back at her apartment, Clara was experiencing a different kind of quiet. She sat on her couch scrolling through social media. but her mind kept drifting back to the dinner. The memory of Daniel's calm expression as he walked away replayed in her head more than she expected. Usually, he would have asked more questions. Usually, he would have tried to fix things. But that night, he had simply left. Her phone vibrated, again with a message from someone else. She smiled briefly while reading it and replied quickly. Yet the conversation didn't hold her attention for long. Later that night, she opened her photo gallery. Hundreds of photos filled the screen. Many of them were from trips she had taken with Daniel: beach, sunsets, city walks, random selfies where they both looked happy without trying too hard. She paused on one photo taken during a rainy afternoon in a small cafe. Daniel had been laughing while trying to dry his soaked jacket. Clara remembered how much she had laughed that day. She stared at the picture longer than she expected. Then she closed the gallery and placed the phone down. It's nothing, she told herself. Days continued to pass. Daniel stayed busy with work and personal routines he had slowly abandoned during the relationship. He started reading again in the evenings. Sometimes he cooked simple meals instead of ordering food. The quiet moments in his apartment felt peaceful rather than lonely. One Saturday afternoon, Daniel decided to visit a bookstore he used to enjoy before life became so busy. The shop was small but cozy, filled with tall wooden shelves and the soft scent of old paper. A gentle bell rang as he pushed open the door. He walked slowly between the shelves, scanning book titles without a clear plan. Sometimes he picked up a book and read a few lines before placing it back, while reaching for a travel guide on a high shelf. Another hand reached for the same book at the same time. Their hands brushed lightly. "Oh, sorry," a woman's voice said quickly. Daniel turned and saw a woman with dark curly hair and bright eyes. She looked slightly embarrassed. "No problem," Daniel replied with a polite smile. The woman laughed softly. "I guess we both had the same idea." She held up the travel guide. "Do you travel often?" Daniel shook his head. "Not as much as I'd like." She smiled warmly. "Same here. I spend more time reading about places than actually visiting." Then they stood there for a moment holding the same book. "My name is Sophia," said Daniel. Sophia eventually handed him the book. "You can take it. I'll find another one." Daniel hesitated. "We could both look at it," he suggested lightly. They sat at a small table near the window and flipped through the pages together. The conversation started naturally, moving from travel destinations to favorite cities and random stories from past vacations. It was simple, easy. Neither of them tried too hard to impress the other. After about 20 minutes, Sophia checked the time. "I should probably go," she said with a friendly smile. Daniel nodded. "It was nice meeting you." "You too," she replied as she stood up. She looked at him thoughtfully. "You seem like someone who's thinking about something important," she said. Daniel was surprised. "Is it that obvious?" "Not really," she laughed. "Just a feeling." Then she added kindly, "Whatever it is, I hope it works out." Daniel watched her leave the bookstore with a small, thoughtful smile. Back across the city, Clara was slowly beginning to feel something. Unfamiliar, uncertainty, a full week had passed since the dinner. Daniel still hadn't contacted her. The silence that once felt temporary now started to feel heavier. One evening, she opened their old message thread. The conversation history stretched back years. Thousands of messages filled with jokes, plans, small arguments, loving words. The last message from Daniel was simple: "Good night. Get home safe." She realized something then. He had truly stepped away, for the first time since they met. Daniel Hayes was not waiting for her attention. A strange, tight feeling formed in her chest. Without thinking too much, Clara opened the message box and typed a few words. She stared at the screen for nearly a minute before finally pressing send. "Hi, can we talk?" The message traveled through the quiet digital space and arrived on Daniel's phone a few seconds later. Daniel was sitting at his kitchen table reading when the screen lit up. He glanced down and saw Clara's name. For a moment, his heart beat a little faster. Memories of their 3 years together flashed through his mind. But he didn't open the message immediately. Instead, he sat there quietly, staring at the phone as if weighing something important. Because this time, the decision wasn't about fixing a relationship, it was about whether reopening that door would bring peace, or bring back the same pain he had finally begun to leave behind. The message sat on Daniel Hayes' phone for a long time. 3 simple words from Clara Bennett. "Hi, can we talk?" His fingers hovered over the screen. Normally, he would have typed back immediately, perhaps even called. He had always been the one to bridge gaps, the one to mend things. But this time, something inside him had changed. The calm he had found in the silence of the past week reminded him that not all bridges needed crossing. Not all doors needed opening. He sat at his kitchen table watching the city lights flicker through the window. The apartment was quiet, the hum of traffic distant. Daniel remembered the dinner. Clara's hand pulled away, her cold voice echoing, "Don't touch me, Daniel." That moment had hurt more than any argument he had endured. It had made him realize that love wasn't just about holding on. Sometimes it was about knowing when to let go. He took a deep breath and typed back slowly. "Sure, tomorrow afternoon." He hit send, not with desperation, but with composure. He wasn't running from the past, but he wasn't clinging to it either. The next day arrived with a cool, clear morning. Daniel chose a small park for their meeting, the same park where they had spent quiet Sunday afternoons in the past. Trees swayed gently, birds called in the distance, and the calm water of the small lake reflected the pale morning sun. He arrived early, walking slowly along the paths to collect his thoughts. The breeze was soothing, but it couldn't erase the memory of her words. Still, he reminded himself that this meeting was about clarity, not passion. Clara arrived a few minutes later, her steps hesitant, her eyes searching for him. She had spent the night restless, thinking about the silence that had stretched between them. For the first time, she realized that the man she had taken for granted wasn't waiting endlessly for her affection. The thought made her chest tighten. As she spotted him, she noticed a subtle change. He looked the same, yet different, calm, steady, confident. There was no tension, no desperation in his posture. "Hi," she said softly. "Hi," he replied, his voice steady. They walked together to a quiet bench by the lake. They sat without speaking for a few moments, letting the gentle rustle of leaves fill the silence. Clara's hands fidgeted with the hem of her sleeve as she struggled to find words. Daniel sat with his hands loosely clasped, waiting for her to speak first. Finally, Clara exhaled and said, "I've been thinking. A lot." Her eyes flicked to the lake, but her voice trembled slightly. "About us?" Daniel nodded, listening quietly. I think I made a mistake," she continued. "I was confused and I pushed you away when I shouldn't have." Her voice cracked just enough to make Daniel's heart stir, but he remained composed. He had anticipated her regret, and while a part of him still cared, another part had learned patience and self-respect. "Daniel, I miss you," she admitted, her eyes glistening. She looked directly at him now, searching for any sign that he would take her back. The words would have once filled him with hope, perhaps even prompted immediate reassurance. But now, he only felt a quiet sadness. He remembered every moment leading to this point. The withdrawal, the distant eyes, the cold words at the dinner. He knew that love was more than missing someone. It was about mutual care and respect. "Why did you push me away?" he asked calmly. Clara lowered her eyes, guilt heavy on her shoulders. I wanted something different. Someone more exciting. Someone new." Daniel didn't respond immediately. He allowed her words to settle between them. The air seemed heavier now, filled with the tension of unspoken emotions. He had suspected this for weeks, but hearing it aloud made it painfully real. Clara's tears threatened to fall, and she hurriedly wiped them, embarrassed by her vulnerability. "I didn't mean to hurt you," she said. "I know," Daniel replied gently. His tone was even, but firm. "But that's how it felt." Silence stretched again as Clara's shoulders shook slightly. She wanted him to reach out, to tell her it was okay, to hold her hand like he had done countless times before. But Daniel didn't move. He had learned that some lessons required boundaries. Some love had to protect itself before it could give again. "I cared about you deeply," he said, looking into her eyes, "and maybe a part of me always will. But love shouldn't make someone feel unwanted." Clara's heart ached. She had expected him to forgive quickly, to resume their old rhythm as though nothing had changed. Instead, she realized she had underestimated the weight of her actions. Daniel's calm strength made her regret all the more poignant. "Daniel, is it too late?" she asked quietly, almost afraid of his answer. He paused, letting the wind and the gentle ripple of the lake fill the space between his words. "I think we both deserve something healthier than what we became," he said finally. Clara's hope faltered, replaced by a sinking realization. The man who had once been the center of her life was no longer fully hers. He had given her a chance, but he was no longer dependent on her approval or affection. The truth struck harder than she imagined. Daniel's love had been patient, but it wasn't infinite. It had limits shaped by self-respect and understanding. Clara's tears fell freely now. She wished she could turn back time, undo her distant behavior, and treasure every moment she had with him. But life didn't offer second chances, so Daniel stood, gently but firmly, signaling the end of their conversation. "I hope you find happiness, Clara," he said. There was no bitterness in his voice, only clarity and a hint of sadness. He turned and began walking along the park path, his steps measured and calm. Clara watched him go. Every step he took away from her seemed to echo in the empty space of her heart. She realized that love alone wasn't enough. It required choice, attention, and respect. When she had chosen distractions over him, she had chosen the wrong path. She wanted to call out, to stop him, to beg for another chance. But the words never came. The man who had once waited patiently for her now walked confidently into his own life, leaving her to face the consequences of her actions. The wind stirred the leaves around her, and the quiet lake reflected her tear-stained face. For the first time, Clara truly understood the cost of indifference. Daniel hadn't left because he didn't care. He had left because he valued himself too much to remain in a love where he was no longer cherished. The park felt emptier than usual. The silence around her seemed to emphasize her solitude. She sat on the bench long after he disappeared from sight, replaying every moment, every misstep, every cold word. She realized that she had underestimated him. Underestimated the patience and strength that came from genuine love. Her heart ached with regret. She had assumed his love was endless, that he would always forgive, always wait. But Daniel had taught her an invaluable lesson. Love cannot survive where it is unappreciated. Even the deepest affection has its limits when it is met with distance and disregard. Clara eventually stood, slowly, as if moving in slow motion. The park around her felt ordinary again, but inside she carried the weight of her realization. She understood now that the man walking away was not angry, not bitter. He was simply whole. He had preserved his dignity, his peace, and his heart. And she had allowed her choices to create a space between them that might never be bridged. Days passed after that meeting. Clara tried to reach him again, but she noticed subtle changes. Daniel replied politely, carefully, but he no longer shared the warmth and immediacy he once had. Each message she sent was met with patience and civility, not the open affection she had taken for granted. She saw, slowly but surely, that some doors, once closed, could not be reopened in the same way. Daniel, on the other hand, continued his life with a quiet strength Clara could no longer influence. He found joy in small things he had neglected, reading books he loved, reconnecting with old friends, and spending time in the park on his own. He didn't hate Clara. He didn't dwell on resentment. Instead, he carried a serene awareness that he had done what was necessary for his heart. Clara's regret became a constant companion. She remembered every smile she had ignored, every moment she had allowed distractions to pull her away from him. She saw now that love was not just about being together. It was about choosing one another every day. One evening, months later, Clara walked past the park where they had met for that final conversation. The memories pressed against her like the weight of a tide. She looked around, hoping, perhaps unconsciously, that he might be there. But the park was empty, quiet, and ordinary. The realization hit her fully. Daniel Hayes had moved on, and there was nothing she could do to undo the choice she had made that night. For the first time, Clara Bennett understood the profound truth. Some people leave not because they stop loving, but because they finally start loving themselves. And when they do, no amount of regret can change the path they have chosen. She walked away from the park slowly, carrying the ache of her mistake, the echo of his calm voice, and the finality of a love she had lost forever. Daniel Hayes had taught her that love must be mutual, that boundaries matter, and that the most heartbreaking silence is the one left by someone who finally chooses themselves. And in that silence, Clara realized sometimes losing someone is the only way to truly understand their worth.